Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 35. This is covering all manner of Siberian shamanism, the Siberian tribes, often undermentioned, and their influence on cultures really all around the world. This is going to focus on a choice number of tribes in Siberia, whereas there is much more to be said. And even the ones that we are touching on, it is more of an overview. We're focusing on the differences in shamanism and the tropes of their beliefs while getting some biographical information, some general information, and equating ourselves with what kind of culture, what kind of beliefs are found here, and how do they tie to the natives of America? How do they tie to the Japanese? How do they tie to the Finnish people in Europe, the Slavs, and so forth? If you stick with me throughout this, you're gonna see that history and fundamental beliefs um, can find their roots back in Siberia, which, this whole talk will really elaborate on that point. But to begin, there are many, 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 at least, I mean, you could say over 100 different ethnic groups in Russia. There are 41 that are legally recognized in Siberia, in the North Siberia and the Far East. And then there are larger ethnic groups that are given their own autonomous regions in Siberia. So there's different categories per se when we're talking about, the bureaucratized world here. So there are those that are recognized, those that are large enough to have autonomous areas, and then there are those that are so small that they're not recognized or aren't given the same legislative credo. Some of these tribes, including the Oroks and the Nenets, are as few as 450 or 350 people. Much like in the States or in Canada or elsewhere in the world, you see that there is generally bad conditions for the natives. And there's many, many factors as to why that is. However, when it comes to Russia, we're talking about 0.2% of the total population, which would roughly put the indigenous peoples at about 250,000 people. And even though it's such a small percentage, they live in 2/3 of the mass of Russia. I mean, again, roughly, but pretty much what people think of as Russia or Russian people, classically speaking, live to the far east of the country. Or no, 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 I'm getting that backwards. Live to the far west of the country, and the far east and Siberia and the like are these autonomous regions. This is where you see these different tribes. So they are all, as mentioned, very diverse. They have different languages, they have different beliefs, they have different histories, different traditions, but there are some reoccurring tropes that you can use to make a general broad stroke understanding. And that is animism and shamanism, being nomadic or at least semi-nomadic, certain traditions of hunting, gathering, fishing, and something to do with reindeers and something to do with bears. We'll see that over and over again. Um, these different languages go into three linguistic groups, that is the Uralic, the Altaic, and the Paleo-Siberian. The Uralic is a reference to people that long ago inhabited the Ural Mountains in the west of Russia, and the Altaic is further to the south, again, a set of mountains. But right away, I want to point out, this long topic in the history books of Indians coming over from Siberia into the Americas, crossing the Bering Strait or the Beringia Bridge, um, anywhere between this giant estimate for 40,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago. I mean, come on, right? However, there is no answer to the mystery of why. There's a lot of questions that go unanswered when it comes to this point of history. And there's an idea that this area that I mentioned, the Altaian Mountains, was very populated about 20,000 years ago. And this would have people seek out new territory. I mean, this guess could go as far back as 35,000 years ago as well. And the main tie that can be found is in, well, language and genetics. The last common genetic ancestor that's shared between the people that now live in the Altaian Mountains and the Native Americans was 20,000 or 25,000 years ago. So we're taking a deep swath into the past when we're talking about this giant migration and why it happened. But there are alternative ideas, one of which we've already touched on in the course, and that is the genius level of circumnavigation and seafaring of the Polynesian people, how Southeast Asians could have arrived via boat, long before the history tends to project it. So there might not be just one answer to who comprises the ancestry of the natives of America. But the other kind of real offshoot guess too is that if we're dipping far, far back into the past, Europe and America would have had a glacial maximum that would have actually made it feasible to walk from Europe to America. But all of this is just speculation. Now, when I'm talking about shamanism and shamans, I want to just briefly go over the topic. That is just to say, um, trusted individuals that are that make contact with the spirit world on behalf of those around them to serve some purpose. Many names have been thrown out to kind of give an analogous nature to what a shaman is. Some people have translated it as priest, although, that's not a real good fit, or mediums, spiritual healers, prophets, and all of these things in their own way could be viewed to be true. They're also doctors, they're also psychiatrists in different ways. So, just to give that context before I'm talking about shamanism over and over and over again. This is a very broad term that's applied to a certain type of cultural figure that we see all across the ancient world, and all, like, literally all across the ancient world. So in studying it now, we're going to look into more of the idiosyncrasies as we see them in Siberia. And I want to start with the Samoyedic people, and this is technically a language group. And so this is a grouping of different peoples that speak a common tongue or a related common tongue. And the people that preceded this grouping were found to be branching out from a Uralic language 3,500 years ago. And overall, these people in their relation to Europe has been a very mixed bag, because on one hand, the trade for things like weapons and tools has also introduced terrible things as well. I mean, smallpox, syphilis, alcohol. So this is just to kind of give credence to the real mixed bag of becoming involved with the world whatsoever as a tribe. It would seem better yet to be completely isolated, right? Which, what does that say about the modern world, huh? But anyhow, although it would seem that many would be converted or many would be kind of shuffled out of their old ways, the way of the world has almost contradictingly pushed tribes back towards their ancestral beliefs. So the Samoyedic people are an interesting case of this, along with several shamanic tribes and peoples across the world. So, as mentioned, this is a big group of people and beliefs vary, but the center here is, of course, the shaman. He or she, or I guess I shouldn't say that because they don't all have female shamans, but the shaman is the primary religious functionary, the one that orchestrates all ceremonial events. He is the mediator between the supernatural and human existence, predicts the future, brings protection for people who are about to go hunting or fishing, finds objects that have disappeared, would be the one speaking over and doing the ceremony of the funeral. And in these peoples, in the Samoyedic peoples, you see that the shamans are ranked. And from here forward, I'm talking about the Nenets, which are one of the more predominant groupings of the Samoyedic people. And so you have a class of smaller, lesser shamans, which could be likened to soothsayers or um, divinators. They haven't mastered the ways of the shaman, and this requires travel to typically travel to the upper, the middle, and the lower realm. If you need any more context and understanding what I'm talking about in this session, you need to go back into the course or look further into shamanism. I've covered this topic plenty, so I'm trying to keep it advanced for those who understand it better. But anyhow, there's the lesser and then there's the greater. And so you earn your respect in time through many shamanic acts, through what miracles you work, through your knowledge that you gain. And these shamans in particular have these 3 different costumes that they'll wear depending on the occasion. And this has roots in the belief that a shaman is born 3 times. So a number of things here. The understanding that death happens reoccurringly, there's one belief. So even though you have one life per se, that doesn't mean that you haven't died a few times over. The you that you were as a teenager is not the you that you are now. In that way, that you is dead. Or the literal act of reincarnation, right? So depending on interpretation here. But of course, here we see the use of 3. The shaman has 3 costumes. The shaman is born 3 times, and there are 3 different realms. And I've gone over the trope over and over and over again of the ubiquitousness of 3 in all religious traditions. And here we can say that we're looking at the root, or very near to the root, that 3 seems to have its sacral origin in the 3 different realms of existence, as per shamanic belief. But anyhow, these shamans of the Samoyedic people, of the Nenets, have been shown to have done some trading or some cultural intermingling with different shamanic groups of the area, most notably the Tungas or the Evenks. So this can't be looked at, these tribes can't necessarily be looked at as pure isolates, because now they're starting, they have merged more with each other than in the historical past. And that's me sticking my neck out a little bit, but I'm trying to give out understanding here. the curiosity here, and talk about maybe if there's meddling in the pool, the Netsi deity, there is a creator deity. And so in this way, there is the one above all, the one who created all human beings and all inanimate objects, called Num, N-U-M. And generally speaking, this deity keeps themselves at a distance from humanity and only assists if called upon to counteract the opposite of the deity, which is this Nga, 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 which is this evil, death, and the god of evil, death, and hell, which this trope is this duality. So here it's a father-son duality, that first there was the creator deity and the son is actually evil. So that's an interesting twist on what we've seen in the past and in different traditions. So there are those that are benevolent spirits and then those that are malevolent spirits. So both exist. But of course, having this all-ruling deity is an interesting characteristic of different shamanic tribes, which we could point to in saying monotheism, or the idea that there is one above all, extends way back into prehistory, and yet again proves the point that the idea of monotheism is not original whatsoever. um, so this benevolent creator, this distant father, is shapeless, transcends time. You also, in this belief system, have the mother deity, the earth mother, as you find all across the world. And she is also sympathetic to humanity, as I feel she would be with all beings on the earth. So you can find that these people, the Nensi of the Samoyedic language group, um, are at times worshiping stones. And this is to say that it's that classic animistic belief that everything is spirit, that everything involves consciousness, that everything has divinity within it. And in the same way, there are rivers and lakes that are considered to have spirits of their own. And this could be a further explanation to the etymological root of the term soul, how soul goes back to Seol, which is a reference to the sea, to waters, to lakes, and that there's soul in the waters, going all the way back to this, everything is spirit philosophy. And that all of these spirits, elemental or otherwise, are intermediaries between the creator deity and humanity. So they are beneficial and they are messengers between the two. And curiously enough, just to kind of talk about some idiosyncrasies of the Samoyedic people, there's this belief of each person born has a corresponding star. So, this immediately makes me think of how people have freckles on their skin, and this could resemble a constellation. I think it's a fascinating little tidbit. One of the taboos of the people is the evilness of the wolf, that this is a taboo animal, whereas its opposite is the reindeer, and the reindeer is pure benevolence, the most pure animal, especially the white reindeer. And again, this isn't unique. We'll see this over and over again, and is associated with the sun and sacredness. And the same with the bear in different ways. And in this belief system, so it is also true of certain fish, such as the pike. Certain fish are revered. prized. Now, when it comes to ancestry and peoples, each family line seems to have its root in a animal. So imagine that what an animal does is associated with your heritage. So your heritage is tied to, say, the fox, and so when the fox shows up, that is specifically a message for your bloodline. So we're getting into this ancient past, and again, not ancient, still modern. Um, whew. Now, here's another trope that we'll see. So there's this ancient idea that by all means was found to be true through practice, but the reason for the hunter-gatherer modality, where men go out and hunt and women harvest and stay closer to the dwellings, there's this idea that if women pass by their hunting gear, they need to cleanse it. And you might say this is, patriarchal, but the idea is that women can be sniffed out by animals more easily, and that men, and this is just empirically true in their minds. I can't quite say if it's objectively true, but it would seem so, right? Um, that men cannot be sniffed out so easily. So this would kind of be the thing that would create that original modality that still exists to this day. And when we're looking at the Samoyedic people, we're talking about the language that would go to Finland through the Sami people to the Finnish people and would form their mythology. So everything that I'm talking about here today, Siberia and the peoples of Siberia root why the Finnish mythology is the Finnish mythology. You can find all the tropes here with exception of some of their own deviations, for instance, the cupstones. But to move on to a different people, it's the Altaian people, which I mentioned before. And the Altaian mountains are this set of mountains that are directly between numerous countries. So you're talking about the far western end of Mongolia, the far eastern ends of Kazakhstan. You're talking about the very northwestern tip of China, and the very southern, it's kind of, yeah, southern border of Russia. So it's kind of nestled between this whole area. So you can count this as Siberian when it comes to these people. And these people are, again, historically pastoral nomads. Many of them nowadays have settled, but there are some that still are semi-nomadic at the least. And yes, yet again, we're seeing they are patrilineally focused, of which we could see this across the board in many respects. And that these people historically do not have a name that is associated with them. They're just people and they just live here. And then people come along and ask what their name is, even though there is no country, there is no any of this. It's land. It's existence. I hope you guys can see the absurdity that is brought to this. And so their name is taken by where they live. And this is much the case that we see when it came to naming the tribes of America as well. And so they're called the Altaians because they're by the Altaian mountains. That's where they live. And here is a kind of nexus point of many of the Turkic people, many of the Turkic speaking people, and many of these tribes that unfortunately I don't get to mention in this session. But in all directions, they have a kind of commingling point there. And by the way, I'm saying Turkic people, which is, yes, different than Turkish people. Hopefully I never needed to point that out, but several attempts have been made at converting and proselytizing these particular people. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and kind of weird, right? Because Buddhism isn't usually the proselytizing type, but when you think about it, they did take over all the beliefs that were inherent in Asia before them. But anyhow, the interesting thing that the Altaians did is that in the early 1900s, there was this movement to create their own monotheistic religion called Burkeanism. And unfortunately, I don't get to go into detail on that, but just to show that there has been some interesting religious, spiritual movements in the area. However, shamanism can still be found, and shamanism as a religion, as a medical practice, as a philosophy, you can find this not just here, but across Central and Northern Asia. And so this term for the shaman in this linguistic is kam, which is interesting. We'll bring that up later. Kam, or the shaman, is a guide between the world of the dead and the world of living. So notice how I'm changing the definition of shamans already versus when I was talking about the Samoyedic and when I'm now talking about the Altaians. So the guide between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and a guide between the world of nature and the human world. So we're seeing a different focus, right? And so when it comes to selecting the shaman, the ability is thought to have been innate or inherent. So, or inherited, because there's this thing called shaman sickness or shaman illness, where a young adult or a child shows a particular characteristic, a particular ability or idiosyncrasy, which would have them labeled as a potential shaman and would put them down that road. And as with all shamans, but here as well, you see that this use of music is especially important. And here we're talking about the tambourine. And I'm not just talking about shaking, I'm also talking about drumming, the drumming tambourine. And this would be your kind of motif as a shaman, the use of music and how masterful you were with this tambourine. And so the different frequencies of the beat, the different singing tones that you'd use, the different traditions and knowledge that you know in the different ways of traditionally appealing to spirits and or the gods, depending. And so in this group of people, every pre-incarnation is in the heavens. You first exist in the stars or in the sky. Spirit, air. And to move to earth is to take physical form. And that this can be allegorically embodied by a shooting star. So when the ancients would see a shooting star, right? Or a ray of sunlight. And that the idea here is that upon the ritual of what should we call it, a man and a woman getting together, the idea is that the spirit would come through the top of the yurt or the chimney, and although the physical body might be forming, the life essence comes from the air. And so that is the kind of conception, curiously enough, just to kind of get these more cultural nitty-gritties here. And this curious idea of what is referred to as a double. So a person is thought of as two in this way. You have the body, you, the you that is your body, and then you have the you that goes somewhere else when you're sleeping. So this is the idea of the potential multiplication of the soul that we find in shamanic traditions. And in this case, the double can be taken from you or can go missing. And in which case, it's the place of the shaman to return that missing part of you, that missing double. One of the old tales is to be wary of the mountains, because in the mountains, it's possible that you can leave your double there or your dream traveling self in the mountains. And if you are not together in the body, this could breed sickness. And you would find this in the concept of Itzi and the multiplication of soul in Finnish mythology as well. Um, and in this way, when such a thing is brought to the shaman, what does the shaman do? The shaman doesn't do these things by themselves. They call the spirits together to help them in whatever ritual that they're doing. So the spirits help to find that missing part of you. And so this is referred to as soul loss, which I'm trying to move quickly. I'm not going to try to go into more detail here, but interestingly enough, when it comes to some funeral rites in this Altaian tradition, there are ceremonies that are held for the deceased on the 7th and the 40th day after their death. So there's more to dig into when it comes to that. We're seeing a sacredness of 40 days here. Is that pre-Christianity influence? And the same with 7, right? I hope you're getting that curiosity too. Next, I want to talk about the Ket people. And again, we're talking about not again. These are said to be some of the last surviving people of an ancient tribe or an ancient nomadic tribe that lived in central and southern Siberia. So we're not far off here from the Altaian mountains. And this tribe in particular, unlike the others that I've been mentioning, or just like the others, but I haven't mentioned it for them, take place in reindeer breeding. And interestingly enough, linguistically speaking, it's been shown, hypothesized, as much as you can prove these things, they are related to what are called the Nadine languages, or what languages you see all across British Columbia and Alaska with Native people, all the way down to the Navajo and peoples of northern Mexico. So here we have a tangible root of finding a linguistic thread between people who now live in, southern and central Siberia to the natives that live in the Americas. And something that we find here too is this story, this cosmogony, this creation story that involves what is referred to as the earth diver. And this story usually involves a bird or a figure that goes under the water to fetch land to bring it out and up over the surface to make the world not just a endless ocean. And this story always involves a creator and some other being that's fetching the earth. And sometimes this other being is made out to be a devil or just someone else. And we found this when we were talking about the Slavic mythology. This has been found in the Slavic people. You find this in the Finnish people and the Sami people, like I mentioned before. You find it all across Eurasia. You find it in the Seneca people, in the Iroquois, and the Blackfoot. And you find it in northern India. So this trope has worked its way around the world, speaking of a mutual thread that has been is ancient beyond measure. I mean, when did this story begin? And how long has it been told? Right? However, when it comes to the Ket story, these two beings, the creator and the helper, are collaborating. They're not competing. Whereas in Slavic, as an example, as we saw, these are two brothers that are always in competition to each other, the white god and the black god. But here they get along. And we've seen that a few times throughout the course, how one story gets changed by the attitude of the culture that inherits that story. So some other idiosyncrasies. People and bears have 7 souls for the Ket people. 7 souls, which I'm not going into detail there. Other animals have 1 soul, but fish don't have a soul. So this would be the different taboos that would have you, what animals do we do ceremonies for if we hunt them, and what animals do we not do ceremonies for, you see. So this is how it would be decided, the ascribing of a number of souls, which, gosh, I'm not going to get into that. And so, of course, we see objects that were even created by men, man-made objects, are spiritual. They include spirit. So with the Ket people, you see on their doors, on their sleds, on things like ladles, they draw eyes across them, all over them. And this is to hearken to the fact that they are assistants to existence. So imagine that level of gratitude with everything around you, that you see it as something that is miraculously created to assist your life. Gosh. So with these different taboos, though, as I've mentioned, this many souls, not this many souls, there is such a concept of things that help humanity and then things that are bad, right? And so this is how you create the different taboos in this kind of mind frame. Interestingly enough, too, something that I've talked about a few times in this course is the world tree. And in the Ket shamanic staff, you see a depiction of the universal tree. This would work its way into esotericism via the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, via the Kabbalah, the Tetragrammaton, via Yggdrasil of the Norse. This story goes all across the world, the universal tree. And so perhaps with the Ket people, we are seeing where this kind of modality came from, right? Or is the nearest to its root, perhaps. And this tree would be a channel or a means of travel between the realms. The roots is the lower realm, the trunk is the middle realm, and the upper world is the the branches, the leaves. And maybe it's the other way around, but you get the allegory that's being gone for here, and how that would directly translate to Yggdrasil or Yadrasil or the world tree in Norse mythology. But instead of 3, they just decided to times 3 over itself, 3 times 3, and make 9. Oh, man, people. I hope you guys can see these threads coming together here. More idiosyncrasies. So east and south means life. To travel east and south, or the directions of east and south, mean life. West and north mean death. This shouldn't be weird to anybody. This is very obvious. The sun rises in the east and moves across the south. That's what sees the sun, whereas the west and the north don't. So it's the opposite of life. It's death. This is the yin yang that the natural material world makes an allegory of itself with. Animals understand human speech, and yet again were believed to be sensitive to the smells of a woman. And in the same way, women couldn't walk around the hunting gear, otherwise it would need to be smudged over. Women, in their responsibilities, would cultivate, nurture the family fires, which we talked about this in the goddess comparative religious topic, where this is the fire mothers. And these fires represent your ancestry. The fire is passed down through your family line. And so you don't feed bad things to the fire. You only feed the best things that the family has to offer. And fires can only be shared with your family. And so before we are seeing, here's this trope again. Before we were seeing, was it the Samoyedic people who tied their ancestry with animals? So there's this importance on your ancestry, this hearkening back, right? And here we're seeing that it's the conduit of this remembrance of ancestry is through fire. And in these family fires, You could actually use them as a source of divination. In understanding how the fire crackles, you could use this as a source of divination to foresee the future. So, in this tradition of the Ket people, men and women can become shamans. The shamanic gift was passed down to the opposite sex of the next generation after you. So if the father was a shaman, the daughter would inherit the shamanic trait. And it alternates. So if the mother was a shaman, then, you see how it goes? Then the son would have the inheritance. However, women were not allowed the full breadth of the shamanic journey. They were unable to travel to the sky. They were limited to the earthly realm. So, mixed bag here, right? So, in this case, we're seeing variation, right? Other traditions, women can't be shamans. In this tradition, women can, but only so far. And that, yet again, talking about a mutualism, the shamanic gift was manifested or seen at a young age if the child proved to be unsociable or have a weird idiosyncrasy. But more often, it's found in young adulthood. And again, the way of discerning it is the shaman's illness. So this could be perhaps like epilepsy. This could be what by modern standards would be understood as a certain type of mental instability, which allows them to have a lack of certain boundaries, of which would give them the means to grow above that lack and have a special gift that they earned, which would allow them a different sphere of wisdom than the most common of people. I wish I could put this more. Anyhow, after one would overcome the shaman's illness, they would not only regain their health, but they would gain the powers that would come along with that. So, curiously enough here, there's an idea of seven different stages into becoming a great shaman. And the great shamans were the ones that would be traveling to the upper levels of the sky. However, they were uncommon, and if they ever happened, they would be old men, sagely. So yet again, curious here, 7, we're seeing 7 again. 7 different stages. And in my mind right away, this makes me think this sounds like secret society stuff or initiation in its earliest form. But I could just be nerding out here. And in the Ket tradition, you have different types of shamans. There are the shamans that are ascribed to the reindeer. And this seems to be the most common type of shaman. Then you have shamans that are ascribed to the bears. Then you have shamans that are ascribed to dragonflies. And lastly, as far as I could tell, you have shamans that are ascribed to eagles. Now, when it comes to the reindeer shamans, this is why you would see reindeer horns as part of their headgear. When you see bear shamans, these shamans focus on both the upper and the lower world. Or actually, no, the bear shamans would fixate on the lower world, which this isn't what many people might be thinking it is. And then I'm not going to characterize dragonfly shamans anymore, but eagle shamans have a special note because the first shaman was believed, or shamanic wisdom was believed to have been given by an eagle, which is interesting because this shows the religious eagle trope goes way, way, way back, as it still survives in esotericism today. And that this eagle, this giant mythical eagle, was known as the Dach, or the dog, and was big enough to cover the sun. And from the sky it came and taught humans how to shamanize. And the first shaman, in one version, was originally an eagle, but in another version was two-headed and was punished for giving this wisdom to man and lost one of its heads. So this is analogous to the Promethean myth of Prometheus being punished for giving a gift to humanity, a gift of understanding. And so still to this day in the Ket people, you can see depictions of two-headed eagles found on pendants. And this first great shaman, Do, is depicted with an eagle perched on his shoulder. And so accordingly, in this culture, you can't kill eagles. It is a taboo. So we're going to move on again. That one really ties close to a lot of different traditions that you can find in Native Americans. I want to talk about next the Evenk people. And yet again, we see the same trope, upper, middle, and lower realm. Beneficent spirits that are ruled by a god in this tradition, the guardian of plant and animal worlds, Sevenki. And the lower world is distinguished by a place for all the dead ancestors, which is just like being here on Earth, except there is another level to the lower world where the evil spirits are. So hell isn't the whole thing, if that makes sense. There's a level that is effectively the same as Earth, but there's another level that would be likened to hell in the ancient tradition, right? Curious. And in this tradition, you have a shaman who will only act as the leader when it's necessary. They aren't a chief. And the shaman's role is inherited and it skips generations at times. So it's not a direct lineage. Shamans can also be chosen by other shamans, or a shaman might have a regular person might have a dream that makes it so that they become a shaman. So there's many, this is a much looser way about things, if you see what I'm saying here. In the Evenki people, you see that there is a complicated ritual for the killing of a bear, and this is what would ultimately be found in the Finnish people and elsewhere. This is a very ceremonious act, the act of killing a bear. And in the same way, it's very important, the domestication of reindeer, because the reindeer provides everything, or a very large amount of what the people use: clothing, tools, bones for tools, right? Transportation. Yes, they ride the reindeers. Their housing even. And this is a subject that I've brought up many different times, but this is where we find the origin of Christmas. I brought this up twice before in the course, but this time I'm giving it its full breath because we're in Siberia, we're in the mentality. So we start with talking about the Amanita muscaria, known as the fly agaric mushroom. It was very, very sacred to the ancient people, and still yet, right? And these mushrooms, these hallucinogenic sacred plant mushrooms, grow only beneath certain types of evergreen trees. They have a symbiotic relationship with the root of these trees, which allow them to grow. So by ancient belief, this would be referred to as the fruit of the tree, the fruit of the gods. And since this fruit didn't have any seeds in it, the fly agaric was considered divine, a virginally birthed plant, a miracle. In the many ways, there's really two, but one of the ways to dry out the poison of the fly agaric mushroom is to dry it. So when people would go out picking them, they would put them up on the trees. They would put them up on the branches for them to start to dry out. And this is the beginning of decorating the Christmas tree with a bunch of bright red round decorations. And the shaman would come later, take all of them that had been drying and put them in a sack. Later on, the shaman would come to deliver them to people's houses with his sack, visit them home, but they weren't quite dry yet. So people would take them and hang them in a sock by the fire. And reindeer love the fly agaric mushroom. They dig into the snow, able to sniff it out and eat it whenever they can. And they even drink their own urine after they've done this. And so maybe long ago, the shamans witnessed this and did the same. And the shamanic flight, right? Or the travel to the other worlds, the travel across the cosmic tree, as I've been talking about. And at certain ceremonial times, they would bring this tree into their yurt. So the fruit of the world tree, do you see what I'm saying here? So the tree is in the yurt. And the smoke would have them travel up it. I should say they'll travel up through the chimney into the spirit world after they've taken the Amanita muscaria. And since the tree is positioned at the top of the yurt and they can see up into the sky, what's up there? It's the North Star. The very top of the upper world is the North Star. The very top of the axis of the world tree is the North Star, connecting the entire cosmos. So what? There is a star on top of the tree. And what about coming back, right? So the shaman entrusted with this journey, this sacred journey, would go out into the spiritual realm to achieve wisdom, to achieve prophecy, to bring something back, the most sacred gifts back to the people. The people held a bit like a tremendous importance as to the shaman's travel. And I've already talked about plenty in this course, the back and forth of the concept of the birth of the sun and that relationship to Christmas, how the lower world, the sun travels into the lower world and doesn't return. I'm not going to get into that right now. But looking at the Evenki people and looking at the importance of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, looking at how it's been ripped off for Christmas, and looking at why it was so important to them, because especially in the winters of Siberia, the time where the winter solstice would point towards the fact of warmth returning would be very important. And I know I'm going to go way over today, but I still have another group of people to talk about, and that is the Ainu. And I think this is very important because there were people in Japan before the Japanese got there. The Japanese actually conquered the Ainu in the 9th century. And these Ainu people, guess where they're coming from? They're coming from Siberia. And so Siberian people are making their way east. And so we're seeing many of the same beliefs here in the Ainu people. And likewise, the Ainu people are genetically tied to the indigenous people of the Americas. So in this way, were they a part of the people that crossed the strait? Or were they one of the mixed bag peoples that might have sailed across the Pacific? I don't know. And what do they call the spirits? They call them Kamoi or Kami, right? So going back to that Kam of the name of the shaman, or those who know the spirits, Kam, Kamoi, Kami. And in this tradition of the Ainu, they have a god of bears and mountains. They have a god of the sea, sometimes depicted as an orca. They have a god that is the creator god, that is sometimes depicted as an owl with long ears. But the Ainu people do not have professional shamans, let's put it that way, what we might call priests. The chief performs the religious ceremonies when they are necessary. The Ainu people will thank the goddess of fire each time fire is used. When somebody is sick, they'll pray to the deity of fire to make them better. The belief is that spirits are immortal, and spirits, the respect of spirits will be rewarded in future incarnations and on the earth. All things that happen in the world have an effect on the other world, and it will do right by you. I hope this is adding up. Ainu in the language literally means human. So something I didn't mention about the other tribes, this is often a trope, is that literally the word that we use to talk about these people is their word for person or man or human. And this is true of the Ainu. When an animal is killed, they will send their spirit back. They will send it to the spirit world. That is how much respect goes into everything around you. The bear is held as ultra sacred. And the bear arriving and being hunted in their ceremony is actually a god putting itself in a costume, per se, in a skin suit, to offer a gift to the Ainu people. So in this way, a bear is a vessel of the god of the forest. And that once the bear is killed, they would shoot arrows to the east, which you'd see this all the way over in Finland with their sacred bear killing ceremony, where they would take the skull of the bear, climb up the tree, and at the top put the skull facing the sky towards the east. to send the spirit back to where it came from. And so even though in these ways they are ceremonial sacrifices per se, if you want to dress it up like that, you have to be mindful of the context and the culture that's happening here and the true level of respect that's brought to this creature. We slaughter millions of turkeys for the sacrifice to the economy. So the god in this way, or the spirits, would be the economy, right? And we don't bat an eye. But then we tend to get a shiver with the idea of a ceremonial sacrifice, not understanding any level of respect that's given in different traditions. When somebody dies, or when an animal dies, it goes to the spirit world, and there it's not immortal. It will die over there too, and then it will come back to the earth world. So as beings, as souls, you go back and forth. If a human being angers the spirits, they need to apologize. There needs to be a ceremony to make things right by whatever spirits they are, the spirits of the river, the spirits of the forest, whatever it is, they need to make it right. And not selfishly. They don't just do it for their own sake. Because the belief here is that, you know, as is the old adage, do unto others as you would have done unto you. But others include literally everything around you. The idea of death is that, like in dreams, how you become perceptible of other places and you naturally go places without even knowing how you do it. This is what happens in death. You go to where you go and you don't even have to know how how to do that. The taboo here is that if someone dies, and we saw this in different cultures too, a ceremony needs to be done to put that soul to rest. And this is the root of modern day funerals. A ceremony needs to be done because if they're not put to rest, they can wander. And if they wander, that's bad on us. That's bad on everybody. It's not just bad for the soul, it's bad for the whole community, and it shows where we have failed that person. So it's very serious to release somebody and to respect somebody, to let them go when they die. So the chief leader, or the one who steps up to act as the shaman for the Ainu, is really doing these acts as an assist to the community to diagnose different illnesses of the community and to treat them through ceremony or through more literal actions. They, as a people, also have this concept of the grandmother hearth, or the grandmother fire, or the goddess of the fire. This will harken its way all the way over to the tradition of the grandmother in Native America, and the sacredness of fire would work its way all over to Christianity when fire is repeatedly used in the appearance of angelic and divine beings. With the Ainu, the deities, the gods per se, never deal with evilness directly. However, they assist humans in dealing with evilness. So it is left up to humanity to make things right, to make things good. I find that really interesting. You know, you don't just pray to God to fix your problems, you know? It's like praying to the gods to give you the strength or give you the knowledge to deal with the problem yourself. So I want to wrap things up here. I want to make a few strong points. So last week we were talking about the Polynesians and how they are traced back to Taiwan, and how, as a common cultural characteristic of the Polynesian people, there's a strict adherence to taboos. It's a big aspect of their people. Now, this is me sticking my neck out a bit, but if you can see how the beliefs of the shamanic people as they moved from Siberia to Japan, and how the Ainu people have a genetic link to the Native Americans, is it not too much of a leap to say that perhaps the ideas from Siberia and the shamanism of Siberia, the stories that are shared in all these ancient peoples, worked its way down to Taiwan and moved itself out towards all the islands of Polynesia? And I forgot to mention, the Ainu people do not just inhabit Japan, they also inhabit the very edge of Siberia on the eastern side. So that's another interesting note. Other tie-ins. We saw different tropes that are shared with the Slavic and the Finnish people that seem to have been rooted in Siberia, in these Siberian stories, in Siberian shamanism and animism. And then, of course, as I've reoccurringly stated, the natives, all these different stories, the acts of shamanism, the tropes of shamanism, the inheritance of what it means to become a shaman, what the shaman does, how the shaman acts, how different ceremonies are held. This way of living that still survives to this day and still is done to this day. And it's a miracle, and I'm terribly grateful that this is still observable, because it seems like an almost pure look into the ancient past, the beginnings of the native people, the Native Americans, the beginnings of all these mythologies. I don't know if you guys can tell as listeners, but this subject really, this is a hard itch for me. You know, it's like an itch I can't quite scratch. There's a lot more under the surface here. I might have gotten bogged down in some of the details of describing these different peoples, but I want to give as much lip service to these people as possible, because I can practically guarantee that most of the world hasn't heard these names, and I think it's worthy of it. And I think the overarching thing that I've been trying to express, that it all comes back to the same place, that it's all coming from the same roots per se, I think is saying something very powerful about humanity. Okay, I'm going to close it there.